I dragged my suitcase up the front steps, my shoulders aching from the endless week away. The night air was cool, tinged with the damp smell of rain still clinging to the earth. All I wanted was to drop everything and sink into Mark's arms, to finally feel the comfort of being home. I slid my key into the lock, already picturing his soft smile. But the metal wouldn't turn. I frowned, twisted harder, and tried again. Nothing. Confusion gripped me. This was my door. My key had always worked. I rattled the handle, the sharp noise cutting through the quiet street. A dog barked in the distance, but inside, silence pressed back. My heart started to hammer, heavy and uneven. Maybe it's just jammed, I muttered to myself, though the words felt like lies. The warmth I'd carried from the thought of coming home drained into unease. I pressed the doorbell, my finger trembling just slightly. The familiar chime echoed inside, but something about it felt wrong, detached. "Mark, love, open the door, I don't know why my key isn't working," I called, my voice cracking between nerves and hope. Seconds stretched like hours, the silence unbearable. Then footsteps, measured, unhurried, moved toward me. Relief rushed in, only to freeze when the door finally opened. I leaned forward, expecting Mark's familiar face, the tired grin he always wore when I came back from a trip. But instead, a woman I had never seen before stood in the doorway. She looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and confusion, as if I were the one intruding. For a second, my mind refused to process it. I blinked hard, thinking maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But no, the stranger didn't disappear. Her hand rested casually on the doorknob, like she belonged there. She didn't even ask who I was right away, just raised one eyebrow, as if waiting for me to explain myself. My stomach twisted, a heavy knot forming deep inside. This is my house," I stammered, my voice low, almost desperate. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handle, grounding me in the absurdity of the moment. The woman tilted her head, her expression cool, almost bored. And in that instant, something inside me cracked, just slightly, like glass under pressure. A flicker of panic rushed through me, but I pushed it down. I couldn't show it, not yet. The air between us thickened, heavy with something I couldn't name, and all I wanted was an answer, any answer, that would make sense of the impossible scene unfolding before me. My throat tightened as I forced the words out. "Where's Mark?" The name tumbled off my lips like a plea, but also like a challenge. The woman didn't flinch. She simply shifted her weight, cool as ever, as if my question had no urgency at all. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. My pulse roared in my ears, my chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. I could still smell the faint trace of our home, the lavender air freshener I'd bought, the lingering scent of Mark's cologne. It wrapped around me cruelly, as if mocking my confusion. My hands trembled, but I held my ground. Every second stretched, a battle between disbelief and the sharp edge of reality pressing closer. I was waiting for her to laugh, to say this was some ridiculous mistake. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at me with that same detached calm, and the weight of her gaze chilled me to the bone. In that pause, something unspoken passed between us, something I didn't want to name. My heart screamed for answers, yet my mind braced for the kind of truth that could break a life wide open. And right there, standing on my own doorstep, I knew this night wasn't over. It was only the beginning. She finally spoke, her voice steady, but edged with irritation. "Can I help you?" The question sliced through me, so sharp and casual it almost knocked the breath from my chest. Help me? This was my doorway, my key, my home. For a moment, I stood frozen, words caught in my throat like stones. I felt the weight of the suitcase digging into my palm, anchoring me in a reality that no longer made sense. "This is my house," I managed, my voice trembling as much as my hands. The words tasted strange, fragile, almost childish against her calm indifference. My mind raced, flipping through possibilities. Was she a guest? A relative? Some mistake that could be explained away? But deep down, My gut already knew. The air between us was too heavy, too deliberate, and her eyes told me she wasn't a stranger to these walls. Fear, confusion, and disbelief collided inside me, twisting into something raw and painful. "Where's my husband, Mark?" I demanded, the name breaking from my lips with a force I didn't recognize. She frowned, a tiny crease appearing between her brows, before answering with words that shattered me in an instant. And in that moment, the ground beneath my life gave way. Her answer hit me like a blow I never saw coming. "Mark? He's at work, but he's my husband, not yours." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, wrapping around me tighter with every second. My chest constricted, as if all the air had been stolen from the night. I staggered back a step, gripping the suitcase handle until my knuckles whitened, desperate for something solid as my world unraveled. It felt like my mind split in two. One side screamed in denial, begging me to laugh it off, to accuse her of lying, of confusing me with someone else. But the other side, the part that had lived with Mark's unexplained absences, the excuses that never quite added up, whispered that this was the truth I had dreaded without knowing it. My heart sank, heavy as stone, dragging me down with it. Her eyes never left mine, unflinching, as if she relished my unraveling. I wanted to scream, to demand proof, to push past her and storm inside. Instead, I stood paralyzed, caught between rage and heartbreak. Every memory of Mark, the kisses, the laughter, the late-night talks, suddenly felt counterfeit. And as the silence stretched, betrayal seeped into my veins like ice water, chilling me to the core. I wanted to shout that she was wrong, that Mark belonged to me, that this was my marriage, my life. But the words refused to form. Instead, I felt my lips press shut, my throat tightening until silence became my only shield. I stepped back slowly, each movement deliberate, as if pulling myself away from a fire that could consume me whole. The stranger's calm gaze followed me, steady and unyielding. Inside, a storm raged. Disbelief battled with fury, and yet beneath it all, a strange clarity began to take shape. I couldn't force her to admit the truth. I couldn't make Mark appear in the doorway with some innocent explanation. No, if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. That realization burned hotter than the pain, igniting something steadier than tears. I turned away from the door, my suitcase dragging behind me like dead weight. The street felt darker than before, each step echoing with the sound of betrayal. My mind was already spinning through possibilities, through memories, through signs I'd chosen to ignore. I didn't have proof yet, but I would. And as I walked into the night, I knew the silence of this retreat was only the beginning of my fight. I didn't sleep that night. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced like a film reel on fast forward, spitting out every odd excuse Mark had ever given me. At dawn, I sat at the kitchen table of a friend's apartment, coffee untouched, laptop glowing in front of me. If she was telling the truth, I needed proof. Something undeniable, something that couldn't be twisted into another of his charming lies. My hands shook as I typed in his email password, one I knew too well. What I found made my stomach twist. Receipts for hotel stays in the same city where he claimed he had conferences. Charges on the credit card that didn't match the stories he'd told me. Travel records that painted a life split between two homes. Every click confirmed what my heart had already known but refused to accept. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd built an entire second world. Each discovery cut deeper, yet instead of collapsing, I felt myself harden. The tears that threatened to fall burned hot but never made it down my cheeks. I wouldn't give him that power. Not now. As the evidence piled up, so did a strange, steady calm inside me. My fury wasn't a wildfire anymore. It was an ember, controlled and precise, waiting for the right moment to ignite. I remembered the way Mark used to call me paranoid whenever I questioned him. His sighs, his shaking head, his hands reaching for mine as if to reassure me I was imagining things. Now, staring at a hotel receipt with his name on it, I realized I hadn't been paranoid. I'd been played. The truth was sharper than any blade, cutting through every excuse he had ever crafted. And yet, strangely, I felt stronger with each confirmation. I printed everything, the papers sliding warm from the machine like silent allies. I highlighted dates, circled names, and filed them neatly in a folder. For once, I wasn't the woman who waited for him to explain. I was the woman who would corner him with facts he couldn't deny. My breathing steadied as I stacked the evidence, each sheet a brick in the fortress I was building against him. Still, there was a flicker of grief I couldn't push aside. These weren't just receipts and statements. They were the ruins of the life I thought we'd shared. I traced the numbers with my fingertips, remembering anniversaries, promises, and late-night whispers. But grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not now. The time for tears would come later. For the moment, strategy was the only language I could speak. By the afternoon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, my folder of evidence spread across the polished wooden desk. The attorney raised her brows as she flipped through the pages, her lips tightening into a thin line. "You've got more than enough," she said, tapping one page with her pen, "especially with the clause you both signed." The words sent a shiver through me, not fear this time, but anticipation. I remembered that day vividly, when Mark and I had agreed to the no infidelity clause. At the time, it felt like a safety net I'd never have to use, a formality tucked away with our vows. Now, it was my weapon, sharp and ready. My lawyer outlined the steps, her tone calm but firm, while I sat still, absorbing every detail. Each instruction felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the chaos of the night before. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself a long, steady breath. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the woman locked out of her own home, begging for answers. I was a woman with proof, with the law on her side, and with a fire in her chest that would not be extinguished. And as I left the office, clutching that folder close, I already knew exactly where this was heading. I stood outside the house that wasn't mine, the one he'd tried to make invisible to me. My lawyer was beside me, briefcase in hand, her expression calm and resolute. The evening air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. My palms were damp, but my spine stayed straight. I wasn't here to beg or to weep. I was here to finish what he had started the night he locked me out. When the sound of Mark's car pulling into the driveway reached us, my pulse quickened, but I didn't move. I watched him step out, keys jingling casually, his tie loosened like any other day after work. For a split second, he didn't see me. He didn't see the woman whose life he had split in two. And then his eyes landed on me. His whole body froze, color draining from his face. "Surprised?" I asked, my voice steady, almost sweet. His lips parted, fumbling for words, but I didn't let him speak. "How many wives were you planning to keep, Mark?" The question hung in the air, slicing through the silence like glass. My lawyer stepped forward then, papers ready, evidence neatly stacked, an entire double life laid bare in ink and signatures. Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. His eyes darted between me and the lawyer, then toward the front door, as if he might find an escape route there. My lawyer remained calm, her tone clinical as she began laying out the documents one by one. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, financial transfers. Each page landed on the table like a hammer striking a nail into his coffin. I watched him squirm, his hands trembling as he reached for the papers only to snatch them back as though they burned. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but even he didn't believe the words spilling out. The walls he had built, the lies he had told, were collapsing in real time, and there was nowhere left for him to hide. Inside, the other woman had appeared, drawn by the commotion. Her eyes darted from me to Mark, confusion quickly giving way to horror as the truth became undeniable. She had been just as deceived, just as tangled in his web of lies. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Mark wasn't a man with two lives. He was a fraud whose empire was crumbling before the very people he had tried to control. The lawyer's voice cut through the thick silence like a gavel striking. "According to this contract, Mr. Turner, your infidelity nullifies any claim to assets, property, or joint accounts. You signed it. You knew the terms." She slid the clause across the table, and Mark's face drained of the last trace of defiance. His hands shook as he read his own signature staring back at him, binding him tighter than any chain. The other woman let out a strangled laugh, sharp and bitter. "So this is who you really are," she said, her eyes narrowing as she backed away from him. She looked at me then, not with rivalry, but with the hollow recognition of someone who had also been betrayed. The two of us stood on opposite sides of the same wound, and he was the one who carved it open. Mark collapsed into a chair, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his lies. His stuttering excuses dissolved into silence as he realized no one in that room was on his side anymore. For once, he had nothing left to bargain with. No charm, no manipulation, no escape. And as I watched him crumble, I knew the real punishment hadn't even begun. Within weeks, it was all over for him. Mark was gone, thrown out of the house he once claimed as ours, stripped of the accounts he thought he controlled, abandoned by the very woman he had lied for. Watching him unravel wasn't about vengeance served with fire. It was about quiet justice. Each signed paper, each emptied drawer, each slammed door was a reminder that he had lost everything by his own hand. I walked through the house one morning, sunlight pouring in through the windows, the silence no longer suffocating but liberating. This space was mine again, not the scene of his deceit, but the foundation of my new beginning. I no longer smelled his cologne lingering in the air. Instead, I caught the faint scent of fresh paint and flowers I had chosen, symbols of a life reclaimed. News traveled fast. His colleagues whispered, his reputation shattered, and the mask he had worn for so long cracked in front of everyone who once admired him. He wasn't the polished man with a perfect marriage anymore. He was the cheater who lost it all. And I didn't have to raise my voice or chase him down to make it happen. My dignity had done the work for me. The other woman never looked back either. Once she saw the evidence, she cut him off as cleanly as I had. He had gambled everything, thinking he could keep two worlds spinning, and ended up with none. I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity is wasted on a man who builds his life on lies. She and I were not allies, but in our silence, there was a shared understanding. Neither of us would ever let him touch our futures again. At night, I found myself lying in bed, the sheets cool and untouched by his presence. And instead of loneliness, there was peace. I could breathe without waiting for the sound of his keys in the door, without scanning his phone for answers he never intended to give. My world was no longer shaped by his secrets. It was mine, fully and unapologetically. People asked me if I wanted revenge, if I wanted to see him suffer more, but what they didn't understand is that he was already living in his punishment. To lose not just one woman, but both, to watch his career corrode under whispers and stares, that was a ruin no one could escape. And I didn't need to lift another finger to make it so. One afternoon, as I locked the front door behind me, I paused with the key in my hand, the same key that once betrayed me, refusing to open the life I thought I had. Now it fit perfectly again, smooth and certain in the lock. It struck me then, what had failed me that night hadn't been the key, but the man who pretended to be my home. And losing him meant finding myself. I filled my days with small freedoms I'd once forgotten, morning walks without rushing back, dinners with friends where I laughed louder than I had in years, nights where I slept soundly without the weight of suspicion pressing down on my chest. Each moment was proof that I wasn't broken, only rebuilding. My strength wasn't born from revenge alone, but from the choice to stand tall after being brought low. And when I thought about Mark, wherever he was, I didn't feel anger anymore. He had ruined himself, and I had no interest in salvaging his wreckage. My victory was in my silence, my dignity, my freedom. The key that hadn't fit had led me to the door of a new life, and this time, it was a door I opened for myself.